Okay, it is 6 o'clock and I will call this meeting of the Town of Lunenburg Heritage Advisory Committee to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting takes place in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. The draft motion is moved and seconded that the Heritage Advisory Committee approve the agenda for the September 9th, 2024 meeting as presented. Do I have a motion to that effect? Moved by Jenny, seconded by Nathalie. Any additions or deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Contrary, motion is carried. Item 4 is the approval of the minutes. The minutes moved and seconded that the Heritage Advisory Committee approve the minutes of the September 13th, 2023 meeting as presented. May I have a mover? Moved by Jenny, seconded by Fawn. Any errors or omissions? I know we have not met since September. It's yeah, not in this capacity. We haven't had much to talk about. So without any errors or omissions, all those in favor? Contrary minded, and motion is carried. We only have 2 items on the agenda tonight. First, 5.1 is consideration of the illustrated design guidelines for residential infill. This is a information piece, and I will pass it over to our heritage manager for that.
Thank you, Stephen. Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura LeGraley, and I am the new Heritage Officer for the town of Lunenburg. Thank you for joining us this evening. I want to briefly touch on a few points before we dive into what I hope is sort of a discussion, a conversation, outlining the illustrations for the design guidelines. So on September 13th, 23, the town's Heritage Advisory Committee recommended the adoption of a new Old Town Lunenburg Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw. On February 27th, 2024, Council moved the second reading of said plan and bylaw. Following Council's adoption, staff sent the new plan and bylaw to the province for review. The following illustrations were incorporated to enhance public understanding of the draft Heritage Conservation Bylaw and Design Guidelines. So just to clarify, no alterations have been made to the actual document. These are just illustrations that have been added. So the illustrations that were selected by the Heritage, or were selected from the 2001 Heritage Conservation District Plan and Bylaw Design Guidelines, illustrated by the Heritage Officer holding the position at that time, Bill Plaskett. We have added additional elements and layers for further clarification, which you will see in the document. And the illustrations are really intended to be used as a tool to help visualize how the guidelines can be applied to new residential buildings, additions, and alterations for residential projects. So really, just to simplify, we want to reinforce that this is a draft document. It's a working document. That's why we're here tonight. So looking forward to feedback on the illustrations. And with that being said, I will ask Trevor if he can pull the document up so you can see it. I guess that being said, I can also open it up to the floor and ask you what you prefer, if you would prefer to go through the document like this and kind of address things that you had noted down that you'd like to discuss for feedback, or if you'd rather just have it as an open floor discussion.
What is the wish of the committee? I suppose if you'd like to go through the presentation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I guess maybe a good way to do that is we can go through each subsection. So yeah, Trevor, if you want to jump down to new residential buildings. Oh, Fawn has a.
Sorry, yes, one.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Can we go back to page 2? I just wondered about those questions, the frequently asked questions. Is that for the presentation that you're doing, or is that all going to be there all the time?
Yes. Okay. So basically, I put this page in kind of as a bookmark. So something that I haven't talked about yet is that we're going to be holding an open house on September the 19th. And from that open house and from the discussion this evening, I'm going to put together a list of frequently asked questions that hopefully would be more polished than this. This is kind of just like a draft list of questions that we've had from homeowners over the past couple of weeks. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, so we can start there, I guess. Of course, why? No, go ahead.
On page 3,
Mhm.
and I know we're talking about the illustrations,
Mhm.
but I've used like the former guide, the one that Bill Plaskett did a fair bit.
Yeah.
And so some things keep coming up. So on page 3 in the second paragraph, it talks about architects. But we are not saying that you have to have an architect.
No.
It looks like we're saying that, and I know we're advising that, but we're not saying, I've been asked that question before. Do I have to have an architect? But we're not saying that.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And I think maybe this isn't my place to answer this question because my task was simply to illustrate the design guidelines. So this is actually pulled directly from the design guidelines, the draft design guidelines. So I can definitely look into that for clarification in terms of like future amendments. But yeah, really focusing on the illustrations and not altering.
Okay, I just thought if we are looking at this as a guideline, especially if you're using it for the workshop, for the town, it's a chance to have a go at some of that. It's a little confusing for people. I don't have a lot that's for wording, but that was one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, so and I guess I want to make sure that everyone feels like this can be more of a conversation. I know this is a formal meeting setting, but just for my purpose of getting feedback from you all, I think it will be more productive if it is more of an informal conversation. Yeah, and so I think we can jump into one of the 3 subsections, which is new residential buildings. Yeah, so on the page that you were just on, Trevor, looking at the first 3 illustrations, we can just kind of roll through, and if anyone has any feedback or things that they would like to add in terms of, I guess I had set out 3 points being the clarity of the illustrations, the consistency through the document, and then the third one being the ease of application. So if you want to. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think on that page, I found the illustration for part C, 3.1C, to be, it's a very busy image and a bit larger. So that, because the other 2 illustrations, they're simpler and the lines are more clear. But in that particular one, I think maybe a bit larger might make it a bit easier to perceive.
The problem with that illustration is that the setback isn't the same. Yeah. The problem with that illustration is that on the right-hand side of the road, the setbacks aren't all the same. I mean, is that meant to be that we're saying it's not the same, but it ought to be the same? I mean, that was, I mean, basically, I think most of these pictures are lovely, but I did, and I would share with Natalie that it's so busy that's to be rather confusing, I think. I think it should be possible to illustrate that one more clearly.
Okay, that's super. So maybe a different image to illustrate this. Yep. Okay,
Can I add to that one also?
of course.
Just the wording. Again, sorry about the wording thing, but it talks about having the same setback, and it's kind of like what Oliver says, because when you look at the image and when you live on a street in Old Town, or used to live on, you know, things are not all the same. And when you look at the land use bylaw for setbacks for like the front of a building, it's anywhere from 0 to 4 meters. So what does same mean in that circumstance? Does it mean on average same, close to same?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think I have to go back to my original comment, saying that the guidelines are already approved. And again, I'm really just focusing on the illustrations. But definitely these things are worth noting because, as we know, bylaws are working documents, and it's very possible to have amendments come forward in the future. So these are things that we do want to take note of and possibly bring up in the future. Yeah.
If I could possibly suggest, given the comments about the illustration and some of the other pages for the illustrations, there's little handwritten notes. Maybe if the picture was even blown up a bit or one side and there was a little handwritten something that talked about what same means, because I don't think we're saying every house is lined up, because they aren't now perfectly.
Yeah, so maybe like labeling on the side or beside each excerpt from the bylaw, it could be helpful to have kind of like a plain English, no jargon.
Mhm. That's the one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, that's a great addition. Okay. Does everyone feel good to move forward to the next page, looking at the roof pitches? Go for it.
I thought, because again, explaining to a lot of people about roofs, and you have them listed there, so that's all fine. But I wondered if you could take each one, like a gable end roof, and put it under like write it under, so people could see actually what is. Because for a lot of people, these documents too are quite educational. They actually learn about their own houses when they look at it and they go, oh, okay, that's what I've got. So I just wondered if and there's enough room on the page that if they were spaced a little bit, they could just have that same, I guess it's handwriting, just put in.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. Actually, Mark and I were just talking about that earlier today. So yeah, I think that's a good addition, is having just labeling under some of these images. And yeah, thank you.
And the same might be true for the next one, because rather than go again, is just the dormers too.
Perfect.
If they could have the same.
Yeah.
I would like to suggest that of those roofs, that the lower two do not add significantly to the point. The one on the left at the bottom, you can barely see the roof at all. And in fact, it's so nearly flat, I don't think we want to encourage anybody to think, that's the thing to do. And the one on the right is an absolutely wonderful picture, but who on earth is going to build a building like that again? And I'm not sure that the added bit, which is the roof at the right of the picture that doesn't appear to have been shingled at all, isn't actually tying in with the rest of the roof, which is one of the things we're telling people they've got to do. So I would get rid of those two, and then you'll have space to put the extra information that Form wants.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, I think yeah, maybe that's valid. We could definitely discuss that. I think I had included the hatch roof because there are a few examples of hatch roof, but definitely maybe the ones that are less popular, like the Queen Anne, might not be worthwhile incorporating. But yeah, definitely worthwhile thinking on. Okay, with that, moving forward, yeah, to this page with the dormers and the frontispieces. And I guess also starting to look at this image at the bottom where we've included a second massing. Yeah. Sky. Yeah.
Just to clarify, for the dormers in the top right-hand corner, is that a permissible dormer?
That's a great question.
Because
And
it seems to be more than a third of the roof.
yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think maybe what I would take away from that is I know some of the images have like little writings underneath where it says yes, no,
Right.
kind of to what Fawn was talking about in terms of having labeling. It might be worthwhile having that for this.
That's not a permissible one, is it?
Shed dormers, I think, are
Shed-
by and large rather ugly things, even if very practical. But there is somewhere we prohibit having bigger windows above, wider windows above narrower windows. So it's actually a bad idea to show an illustration that does what we don't allow.
Okay, so so actually maybe this illustration isn't the best example of showing a shed dormer.
I mean, I think you can find slightly more modest degrees of shed dormers that would show the point.
Super. Okay, thank you, Oliver. Okay, moving on to the next page. I noticed that so there's two points on this page that do have images and one that doesn't, which maybe people find totally acceptable. Yeah, anyways, that's something we can talk about. If you think that we should be adding images for everything for better comprehension. Yeah, or if anyone has anything to discuss about these images.
Nothing like a good visual, I always say. But for the chimneys, I was wondering, again, since there's room on the page, they're very, very small. Yes, can you figure it out? And of course, I'm looking at it on a small iPad, but I just wondered if it could get stretched out a little bit or just to keep it separated out somewhat. It's
Yeah.
just a little crunched. I know you also have in these documents a bit of scale like architecture does to these things. So I don't mean to mess with that, but those seem a little smaller than a lot of the rest. And yeah, chimneys are another thing that are hard for people to totally understand.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's easy to do is to increase the scale. Especially because this one has a lot of wording in the handwritten portion. So yeah, that's great feedback to know that it's not quite legible. Just having it a little bit bigger would be helpful. Yeah.
I might comment, I think it's almost impossible structurally to build a brick chimney at the point on a roof that's shown, because you've got to have something strong enough underneath it. And you can do that either in the proper, where you've got an internal wall, or where you've got an external wall, but this looks to be about 3.5, 4 feet in from your exterior wall. So I don't think you'd normally have managed to have a brick chimney right there, because it needs to be supported by a lot of brickwork. I mean, that is, nobody's going to build walls 4 feet thick anymore.
No,
In the Middle Ages, they might have had a big brick chimney there. But I mean, I agree with the basic concept, but I have to admit that a chimney in my own house looks much more like the boxed metal chimney preferred, because yes, it was going to be impossible to have brick all the way up from the ground.
Wait, do you have?
Yes, I was just curious why there's a metal roofing image in with the chimneys.
So yeah, so the bylaw reads that metal chimney, or sorry, I'm just finding myself. Metal roofing. Yep. So we can definitely remove that because it's talking about the roofing materials rather than chimneys, and that's a good pickup that it might make it confusing for some people. Okay,
The
Thank you.
foundation is above. Really shows.
super. That's great. Okay. All right. So with that, the next section is on principal facade design. So yeah, I would love to hear your feedback on this page.
This isn't actually quite about the picture, but it's my opportunity to say this. For some extraordinary reason, 135 Montague Street, which is the house that is illustrated there, doesn't appear in the list of all those structures, you know, the list that comes twice of all the different structures. It's on the map, but it's omitted from the list. I should have noticed this at an earlier stage, but I didn't. But it needs to be on the list. I have a particular connection with the house. My wife grew up in it, so. But I just picked that up when I was reading through it again this morning, I'm afraid. But that is what that house, that is where that house is. And the way in which the picture is done to show the balance is very good.
Yeah, does anyone else have anything to add when it comes to the balancing of the facade, the main entrance, or I guess we can also look at the following page because it's also talking about facade design, looking at frontispieces and the alignment of dormers and windows.
On page 10, where it talks about symmetry, and it talks about should be balanced through either bilateral symmetry or asymmetrical balancing. I get the asymmetrical balancing part, and it's tagged there. Bilateral symmetry is not. Is it? And I'm not sure that I even know what bilateral symmetry is. Is it just a synonym for asymmetrical balancing with the or word, or is it one or the other? Yeah.
I can definitely look into this for you, Fawn, in terms of also, this is just reiterating to me in my head that we do want this to be a tool for homeowners. And I think it's important to include what's actually being pulled from the bylaw just for covering what is in there for legal sake, but it would also be helpful just to have plain English as this is a tool. So yeah, that's
Right. Or another diagram that shows what bilateral symmetry is.
Yeah, sorry, I do think that the bilateral symmetry is in the diagram is the symmetrical side of things. I think it might, but you're right for the clarity of the phrasing. Yeah, just for consistency across both the illustrations and the text. Yeah, for sure, that makes sense.
I'm aware, and this is really not a matter of the illustration so much, perhaps of the text that we didn't pick up on before, but there are a number of places in the town where you've actually got houses which aren't in any way balanced on this basis. I mean, well, I suppose the ones which have two bays, one of which has the front door in it, you know, there's a lot of them on Pelham Street, but other places as well. I mean, I suppose those are sort of balanced. Yes, that counts as balanced. But there are a number of houses where, you know, clearly you go in one side of the house and not in the middle. And I don't think we're saying you can't do that anymore, but we sort of see the pictures sort of imply that.
yeah, I think that's
I don't have a solution, but I just when I was reading through it all, I just felt that.
No, I think, yeah, that's a valid point. And I mean, I guess the visual here is helpful that it does show that what Fawn was saying in terms of asymmetrical still being balanced, because of course there are many houses with entrances on one side, but still that appear to be visually balanced. But then there's also homes that have been altered over time for new entrances or things like that. So yeah, anyways.
I
Bit
think an
more
example, to your point, Oliver, that I could think of is there's a house on Fox Street. I think it's the corner of Fox and Duke, and there's a couple on Dufferin that have a bay window on one side and then nothing on the other, just a straight front door. So, so those would be good examples, perhaps, if there's illustrations or if there could be.
Well,
made
there's quite a
illustrations.
clutch of them on the harbour side of Pelham, not as far out as you are, but I mean, well, yes, what beyond Duke, there's a number of houses. And obviously, that was at the time they were mostly built around the same sort of period, and people felt that was fine.
And I guess something else to note, and I should have prefaced with this, is throughout the document, there's the use of the word should and there's the use of the word shall, which you've probably picked up on because I've put shall in all caps, so people can clearly see it. And that's because different to other communities' design guidelines, our design guidelines are both permissive and prescriptive. That meaning that some things are prescriptive and some things are permissive. So in this instance, principal facades should be balanced rather than shall. So
Yes.
when it comes down to it, you can have an unbalanced facade, and we're not going to tell you otherwise.
And part of the bind about producing a document like this is, you know, it needs to be a single document for the whole of Old Town. But the truth of the matter is, you could have a design which would seem perfectly fine on a presently vacant lot on a certain street because it would fit into that street, and take the same design to another street and it would just be a sore thumb. But we can't provide for that in the document. Which is why in the end it comes back to saying, yes, you're best off if you do have an architect.
Yeah, okay. So I feel like that conversation could go on for
In the end, that's what this committee's for.
anyways, yeah, I guess I would like to kind of keep the ball rolling and see if anyone had anything to say regarding frontispieces or yeah, the alignment of dormers. Yeah.
I'm thinking for perspective for the frontispieces, maybe showing one on a house just to show where does this belong in case people are having a hard time understanding that they're not just little sheds that are those shapes. I don't know, just a thought on that one.
I like that. Okay, so just including an image maybe beforehand of, and then maybe having these on the side as the frontispieces. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Natalie. All right. Okay, so page 12 looks at windows and doors. Does anyone have any notes about the illustrations for windows? I guess, yeah, we can start with windows. Doors. Okay. We'll, we'll keep rolling to page 14. So looking at trim in, oh, sorry.
I was wondering on this one, down below where there's GH and I, if I just go back to F, that's next to two illustrations. And then when you come to GH and I, the pictures are down where we're talking about skylights. Whereas I think those go with H, I think, the pictures that are there. But there really should be drawings for G and H. So I'm not sure how you do that on that page if it messes up your format. But you see what I mean? The pictures aren't beside the item, the correct item.
Definitely. So just yeah, massaging around the formatting for this guy to make it a little bit clearer, kind of more like the page 12, I guess, where it's pretty simple that we've got a point and then we've got a drawing right underneath it. So it's very clear which drawing is associated with which. Okay, definitely. That's a good. Actually, on that note, I do want to put out to the group that 2 points here don't have illustrations. Do you find that to be, would you like there to be illustrations for all points? I guess the reason that I have the illustrations I do are because these came directly from the Bill Plaskett document. So if there aren't, say, skylight images, it's because maybe in 2001 when Bill was documenting the 2001 design guidelines, skylights weren't as prominent. So yeah, if you think that that's something worthwhile including, I can look at maybe renderings or photographs to include. Yeah. Or if you feel like you don't need illustrations for certain points that aren't illustrated, what does the general feeling?
Yeah, I think illustrations, yeah, overall would be best. Visual is always a great resource when all else fails. So.
Thank you. That's great.
Well, I was going to say, because I think it's important because you're introducing words that are not like mullioned. Most people don't know what that word means. So a mullion frame is even, that much more difficult. And like I say, they wouldn't necessarily know, well, the bay windows goes with that picture, except that it's beside the skylights. But yeah, I think especially when there's uncommon lingo used, it's good to have it.
Yeah, I can definitely look into either adding more Plaskett drawings or yeah, maybe look at adding some photographs or renderings, things like that, just simple renderings. Okay, that's good feedback. Thank you.
I think it's good that you've got the little drawing of the bow window, because I think many people won't understand the difference between bow window and bay window. And given that one is encouraged and the other is forbidden, it's quite important that people should know the difference.
Super. Thank you, Oliver. That's great. Okay, how's everyone feeling about windows? Okay. So the next section is a bit heavier. Basically, this section is looking at prescribing people to include at least 4 of the following elements. So yeah, if anyone has notes on these, go ahead and open up the floor.
I guess kind of for the clarity of, I guess I'm on the next page. Sorry, I don't have anything for page 14, but I'm thinking of with number 5, decorative brackets, cornices, and or eaves, and or I could just noticing that now. And just to clarify, it's at least 4 of the following, and that's all the way down to 8.
Yep.
So you, okay. And I think, so sketches to clarify some of the language, and then some labeling. I guess there is already some between that and some labeling with the sketches. Be good.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was thinking that this afternoon. This number 6 is kind of heavy on the illustrations. So labeling, I think, would be very helpful in this instance. Thanks, Natalie.
Number 2, with the window trim, the I'm not quite sure that really the purpose of, other than sort of architects and the way they draw things, the arrows above the window without any explanation. Not sure what those do.
Yep, we can take those out.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
And on page 15, maybe I had a note just to maybe combine the number 5 and 6, and then indicate underneath the drawings what they are. And one that I found was missing, and again, it's one word, but I'm putting in a little plug for the word corbel. It is a bracket, but I looked up the difference between a corbel and a bracket, and the only difference really is that a corbel is thicker than a bracket. However, here you hear that word a lot. And, or people keep going, what are those things anyway? And they are kind of different from a bracket, even though they have a little bit of, structural integrity to them. But I just thought, oh no, and you can't combine. That's right. But anyway, kind of like above, if some of them were labeled because of some of the word, like a cornice versus a bracket versus a corbel, that kind of thing. Elements of trim, because we have a lot, we being Lunenburg have a lot of unique kinds of trim.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Also because this is a tool for homeowners, that's who it's targeted at. So yeah, in terms of just kind of understanding more about your home and yeah, what makes up the facade, I think that's terrific towards the understanding of it. Super.
I think there's one problem. I mean, I like all the pictures on this page or under item 6. The only difficulty I have with it is that right at the beginning, we made it very clear that new building should fit in and reflect a lot of the traditional elements of Lunenburg architecture, but that we do not want 21st century building to be readily mistaken for late 19th century building. And in a subtle way, this collection of pictures almost implies that it would be seen as good that people should have some of these very ornamental brackets that people started putting in around the 1880s. And yet we don't really expect people to start doing that, nor do we really want to encourage it. Because that goes against what was being the fundamental principle, that it should still be clearly a 21st century building, but one which reflects the traditional architecture here.
Yeah, I think Oliver, you've touched on a huge question.
No, I'm sorry.
In terms of, the heritage world and preserving what we have, but also honoring the future. I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe, and I think I can't speak because I came into this project after these were drafted and approved, but maybe I think that the reasoning behind choosing at least 4 of the following elements is to achieve some distinguishability between our true heritage homes and our new homes. But I'm just thinking out loud in terms of this page and what you were saying about we don't want necessarily to create what's already here. We do want it to be distinguishable. So maybe having these decorative brackets and cornices and corbels kind of illustrated individually would be a different way to present them rather than having them presented. For example, the bottom right-hand drawing illustrates basically the whole package of all of those details together. Whereas maybe just choosing certain aspects might make it seem less.
And one of the difficulties, of course, is that we're producing a single document for a number of different situations, because we're talking both about people who may wish to extend an existing building and people who may build a completely new building. And so if you've got this kind of decorative feature on an existing building to which you're trying to add a side or back extension, putting something like that in, if you don't mind the extra expense, may be appropriate. But it wouldn't really be seen as appropriate in an entirely new building. And yet it's one collection of guidelines.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because I remember meeting with Bill when I was putting on an addition, Bill, and that's exactly what Oliver just said. That's exactly what we talked about, because he said, you live in Old Town, you're putting an addition on. This is kind of the way you should be going about it. And so part of that is, you know, learning the vocabulary of all those trim pieces that you now can choose from. So yeah, I think so. It, you know, in the document, I think there's an aspect of education to it that just makes people, they learn more about their house. And then what's possible or what they have to think about when, if they're considering putting on an addition, because it's a bit of a thing with the certificate of appropriateness and everything, to consider all the aspects of it and their budget, as Oliver was saying, what their budget might be. So, so yeah, I think was Bill's thinking when he included it.
Okay. I think from there I might roll into materials if everyone feels okay with that. Okay. All right. So page 17. This one has less illustrations, but I'm going to point out off the bat that we had already discussed maybe establishing illustrations for all of the points is what would be appreciated. But if someone wants to tell me otherwise, go for it.
Yes, and actually I missed it on the top one, but it's in this one, and it's just a small one, but a lot of people, again, in modern day don't know what a baluster and a balustrade is. And that's actually a bit of a thing when you're actually doing it. And I know here it says shall be wooden. If you look at some of the photographs of some of the homes here in town in the past, there are some that had, and still, I think some do. Yeah, they have like it's like a cast iron. It's not wrought iron. They were white metal, I think. And that was fairly common for trims around like a top of a sunroom, or they use like the baluster to make a balustrade around like an upper deck or something, or a widow's walk or something like that.
This building actually had an iron railing
you
on the
go.
roof originally. Yeah.
There you go. So I know it says shall be wooden. When I looked at that and I went, oh, I know the next one says oddly handrails shall be wooden or wrought iron. But if people understand the baluster, balustrade, and what else do they call them? Spindles. They're not posts, I guess, but yeah. So something like up above, maybe to use that word or words.
Thanks. Okay, super. So again, like along the lines of having kind of plain English or clarification on the side of having the excerpt from the bylaw, just as like a little add-in. Sorry, Fawn. So just having clarification on the side of the actual bylaw text. Is that?
In 3.5B, I could be wrong. Are we referring to residential only buildings here? There is reference to a new commercial building on line 3. I'm just wondering if that was a copy and I know in the bylaw, there's a lot of repetition from one section to another. It might have just been pulled out from the wrong area. And the very last sentence in that section, it says wood is preferred, but non-wooden doors and windows are permitted. But again, we're talking about the roof. So I'm wondering if that should be another point.
Think this is actually talking about materials in general.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
no, that's okay, Natalie. I know it does jump around a lot, so it's kind of hard to keep track. And yeah, so as we go down, it starts talking about porches and verandas and then handrails and steps and things like that. But actually just that's a good opportunity maybe to put clarification in before all of these points and say these material guidelines apply to blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just thought we had like cladding in A, roof shingles in B. We have character defining decorative details in C. So everything seems to be broken out. So I'm not quite sure why doors and windows are in with roofing.
And again, I don't feel like I can necessarily talk to this because
Oh, okay.
it was already approved
That's
in the guidelines.
Okay.
But I can definitely
So that's how
write
it's
this
written
down.
in the, okay.
But can definitely write this down and have it as a note. It's a good note. Thank you.
In a way, this is something, again, that we probably should have looked into and agonized over a year or two ago. But I'm conscious that there are getting to be better and better imitations of wood that you can really very well get away with. A couple of months ago, we were in Salem, Mass, and walking up a street of 18th century buildings. And I noticed we were approaching on the sort of far side of the road up to a sort of little T-junction, what appeared to be a long, long wooden fence with turned spindles, and behind it was a house which had a sort of veranda with identical turned spindles. And only when I was about 6 inches away from that fence did I realize it had a wooden rail at the bottom, a wooden rail at the top, but the spindles were plastic, but so well done that I had to be 6. And I mean, I suspect they were on the house too. I couldn't get at the house, but you know, so I mean, and I can see that, you know, there's going to be increasing pressure to do that kind of thing. And if we could say yes to metal roofs, I mean, I'm not really saying we should change the document, but I am just saying we shouldn't be altogether surprised if a little way down the line people start arguing and saying, but it looks like wood and it's not going to rot in no time at all, and I won't have to keep painting it.
Thank you. I'll just speak to that for a moment. Then that is something that this committee has certainly addressed many times in the past, but I just want to get back on track for the purposes of tonight's meeting. We are actually discussing the illustrations, not the bylaw. So if we could keep the questions to the illustrations. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so with that, we are at section 4. So this is looking at additions to residential character defining structures. Yeah, so again, I want to open up the floor. If anyone has any feedback in terms of things that they feel should be added, things that are missing, things that need clarification. Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm just going through to page 20, 21. These are a bit text heavy in my opinion, but I'd like to hear from you and what you think.
It's not in context of the text. There's a lot. But I think it would be hard to put details in all of those, but on page 20 at the bottom, again on the dormers, I, my understanding of reading it and looking at the sketches, the top two are permitted and the bottom two would not be. But I could be wrong on that. But making it clear that what's a yay and what's a nay, because that is not clear at all in those ones.
Even perhaps an X next to the non-permitted ones would speak volumes more than, because if someone's just flipping through it and seeing that, oh, I can do that, there's a picture right there. Yes, yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, I mean, the one on the bottom right-hand corner really shouldn't be permitted. We just about might allow the one beside it, but
Yeah, no, that's right. And that's great feedback in terms of clarification for the illustrations. In terms of the illustrations on the following page, is that good? Good stuff. Okay. Looking at the two following pages, 22 and 23, in terms of new doors and windows. Does anyone have any feedback? Yep.
Yeah, let's see what I have here. At the top, there is no yes, before, after, and then there are a set of windows with shutters, which go with, what did I have? G? Was it G? No. Yes, it's G. So again, it's hard, like when you first looked at that, I thought, what are they trying to really say? It looked like one of those games where what's missing in the picture? Like there's one shutter missing on one. So yeah, it's like the addition of shutters without historical evidence of their prior existence is prohibited. Is that what goes with that? Or am I wrong? What does that go with, that collection of 4?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's correct, Fauna. And I think this is just speaking again to the same point that you brought up earlier. Some of the pages are formatted with the associated drawings directly underneath, and it seems to me that that is the
Right.
way to go, just in terms of clarity for people
Yeah.
and better understanding. So I can definitely just adjust the layout to make it more digestible.
Yeah, I mean, in a situation like that, you could just put G beside it, or goes with G or something like that. And it does have yes, no, no. It's just hard to know in that circumstance because we really haven't mentioned shutters up to that point. So, so you're tending to look at the actual window. And right, and the storm ones too. If they just came down the page a little bit, so they were beside H, actually that would help probably with the shutter ones too, but they could just come down. Yeah, because it's a little unclear too.
Okay, that's great. No, that's good feedback, because I did kind of play with the layout, but yeah, it's good feedback in terms of just keeping it consistent, and this is the best way for people to understand, so.
And perhaps I was just thinking while Fawn was talking to sort of add to what she was saying. That throughout the document, I'm just seeing with this page, maybe it would be worthwhile keeping it consistent by having all the approved on one side and all the non-approved, because I see it goes no, yes, and then yes, no. So yeah, we could just maybe keep the yeses all to probably keep the yeses on the left and the no's to the right, sort of thing.
They're great ideas.
Easier
Thanks.
for at a glance, sort of thing.
And that's what we want. Again, this is a tool. We want it to be as easy as possible to understand. So yeah, and I guess I'm just going to pull that comment down to the bottom of page 23 in terms of doors and just aligning the images with what which point they're associated with.
Question. Number I, new doors should not be visible from the public realm if possible. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the wording on that is, it's kind of confusing. I think the best way for me to, I think it would be helpful to have just a little bit of additional text to make it more understandable. But so this section is if you flip back, it's on additions. So we're really talking about, if you picture it, you've got your house and now you've built your addition, maybe on the side of your building. You're assuming that your house has a primary entrance. So basically what we're saying here is new doors, so a secondary door. That door, we don't want it to be visible from the public. So for example, putting it maybe on the side would be a
Oh.
better and more encouraged option. But again, this is permissive language, it's should, so we can encourage it from a heritage standpoint, but we can't prescribe it. So if you wanted to put your door on the front, you could. But yeah, it would be encouraged. And that's really just to, from my understanding, from a heritage standpoint, it would be to keep the primary focus on the primary entrance.
So it's really new secondary doors.
That's right, yes.
Is how it should be. And so then, okay, so then the images to the right, new doors may not be added to existing. They go with, I guess it's a whole discussion of doors in this case. I did find it a little confusing, sort of what went with what exactly, but, and I get looking at the pictures, yes, no. New doors may not be added to existing. Right, so that there is a thing about the secondary door confusion with new doors versus, yeah, because then on number K, new doors shall be. So again, we replaced our door when we were on Lincoln Street with a new door. But it was the principal primary entrance at the front. So when I think of a new door, I think of it was brand new to us, you know? So anyway, just that separation of what is actually a new door, like literally a new door that you purchase versus a new addition to the house. Yeah. And then there's the primary and secondary. So
I think you're thinking of like a new build door versus a replacement door, perhaps.
or that,
Yes.
yeah.
Would that be?
I don't know how you tie the diagrams that are there to that. And then what we're talking about is wording again. So
I think, yeah, what it comes down to is less maybe the illustrations and maybe more the layout of the actual bylaw. And it might be helpful because this is a tool and we want it to be as easy, like to understand as possible. And if you guys are struggling, then we really want homeowners to be able to understand it. And we're, anyways, so I would say with respect to that, maybe just adding language to reiterate, these are new doors on additions and not necessarily a new door on your house. But
The problem is that the term new doors is being used in two different senses in successive paragraphs, because you're talking about new entrances which did not previously exist. And you'll also talk about replacing the doors. And I mean, actually, I think under section I, if you actually had the word entrances rather than doors, it might sort it out better. I've got a little bit of a question about the pictures. First of all, I'm not dead sure what the words before and after add to this pair below. I mean, I see what you mean, but because you're saying, you know, if you want to replace your nice Victorian double doors, don't do it with that on the right. But I've also got a question about the picture on the right of the upper row. You are obviously saying no to the door, but unfortunately, it seems you're rather implying that side lights are also unacceptable, which I don't think you are wishing to imply, because there are plenty of good examples of that being quite acceptable.
So maybe just clarification on what this image is illustrating, and that being the style
Yeah,
of the
it's just
door.
obviously it's
Yeah.
style of door, but it comes across as saying,
No.
don't put sidelights.
Yeah, okay. Then definitely we can just clarify. And I think that comes down to labeling
Yeah.
again, and clarifying on that.
I feel like these images belong to what are acceptable replacement doors rather than new doors for entry. New doors for new entryways.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're seeing this is what it used to look like and this is what it looks like now, and we like this, but we didn't like that. So I think it's kind of might be, and I'm realizing with this, I kind of forgot what this section was about because of those images.
That's a really good pickup. So maybe taking out the two that are before and after, because it is confusing in the sense that this is for additions and there would have been no before.
Hi there. First of all, I want to say I think that you're doing a great job. I think that we have to keep realizing and going back to the fact that this is a document that was pre-prepared that you're working with and trying to work through. So none of this you presented to us, and we're working with what you've got to go through. And to Natalie's point, I think I'm just getting up to speed on things here as well. I guess I'm a little confused in that, and I just wanted to clarify that this is for new residential infill. This is what we're looking at. We're not talking about renovations to existing houses. We're not talking about modifying existing buildings. And so I think that there's a number of things in here that if we went through in detail would be completely omitted. And when I say that, the before sections of all of these things don't really make sense for a new building that's being proposed, unless I'm mistaken. So when we see a lot of these diagrams that are super confusing to the public and people who are going to be trying to apply to build something new, to see a before and after, and there is no before, right? So I think that we have to sort of refer them back to what the items are that we're looking to try to achieve and try to make it less confusing, if that makes sense.
Actually, I think we're doing both, aren't we? Isn't that the
Yeah.
whole point? That we're both giving advice about alterations, stroke maintenance kind of thing to existing buildings, and guidelines for new, and that's part of what's difficult, is that it's one collection of instructions and pictures for a number of different situations. But I still think that that's a fair thing to do. But I would entirely agree that before and after are unfortunate words to include, because in most cases there won't be a before. But the same principle applies, that I mean, if you're needing to replace your rotten Victorian door, you've got to still replace it with the right kind of style, and not have a door which might be fine out in Newtown, but won't be any good in Old Town.
Right.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Oliver.
I have Fawn first, then I'll get to the next.
I guess for me, the intro section to all of this that came with this package for us was a comment about how much new housing that Lunenburg needed. And maybe I need clarification. When I think of infill is sort of a number of possibilities within any property. So it could be in a new build or an addition on a property. I know that I had a comment, but I wasn't going to say it because it goes against some of the wording, and it's kind of a real Oliver point in that there's a statement, I think it's somewhere right around where we are, that says you cannot take the roof or attic off a house and build a second story. When in fact, if you know about the history of capes and how capes worked around here, many, many homes started off as cape. They took off the roof, they put up a second floor and the roof on, and then they started adding bays and bumps and box bays and all kinds of things as money from fish, sort of made it. I went to Sid Demerrick's, an architect, lecture on how architecture developed here in the South Shore. So for me, when I think of housing and possibilities, and that's sort of a direction we were kind of going is for even in Old Town, that there were some possibilities. And I know I'm getting away from it, but it just speaks to the point of infill for me, means like varieties of creating density in our neighborhoods, even Old Town.
Can I, yeah, I think that, Philip, thank you so much for your comment. And I think that your comment was really helpful in terms of staying on track. And yes, so far we've only been looking at new build and additions. We are going to touch on, alterations, at the end. And yeah, so, but fun. And I do agree with what you have to say as well. But again, to Philip's point, tonight, we aren't discussing the actual bylaw as it's already been passed. So yeah, if we can just try to focus on.
Sorry, if I may, just into that point too about, not necessarily changing the text of the bylaw necessarily as it is now. I think there is still some room where we can articulate, with those images and sort of plain language text, sort of the intent of what's trying, to be said in that bylaw. So I think there is opportunity there to do that. So just
Right. Okay. Okay. With that being said, there is one last point before we get into alterations. And that's new decks, porches, verandas, balconies, ramps, and stairs on page 24. And if no one has anything to say, then we can jump into alterations. Yeah. So Trevor, if you want to scroll down to page 26. Okay, so yeah, so this is the small, but again, to Fawn's point about it all being infill, all of this ties back to infill, contributing to housing. Whether that is a new project, a new development, or an addition to your building, or an alteration that you're making to your house to increase housing. So yeah, I'd love to open up the floor again to look at the illustrations for alterations.
I'm not quite sure what kind of image you would use to help explain on page 27. And I'm not quite sure how, so alterations prohibited. So this would be to existing. Yeah, what illustrations number 8, where no attempt should be made to correct deflections that have occurred over time. I know what I might define deflections as, but I'm not quite sure what they mean there or how you would show it. And changes over time should be appreciated and understood as essential aspects of vernacular architecture. Extensive restoration is prohibited. By restoration, it's almost like, yeah, renovation more, but can you explain sort of both of those? And I don't even know if you can put a drawing to explain them.
Yeah, I think definitely both of those I would tie back into the standards and guidelines in terms of being distinguishable. You don't essentially want to alter things that have been put in place over time that have now become character defining elements. So I think I would have to do a bit more research and come back to you, Fawn, on those 2 points, and why those decisions were made to include those in the bylaw. But yeah.
Thanks. I just didn't know if it meant, I don't know what deflections mean. Like lots of buildings go on an angle as they get older. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess it was just if it needed an illustration, what would you actually put there? But sure. Thanks.
On page 26, I'm presuming that the picture on the right is meant to indicate what not to do, but it's not made very clear that that's the purpose of the picture, or at least I hope that's the purpose of the picture, because the whole character of the house has been destroyed.
Okay, super.
I mean-
So again, clarity on the illustration in terms of yes or no. We can do
I mean,
that.
it directly contravenes the writing that's to the side of it. Because it says, you know, you must retain, you know, you need to retain the transom and all of that.
No, exactly. No, you definitely understood the illustration, but it would be good to have those.
I think it needs the word NO
yeah.
somewhere there.
Yeah. Or a big X. Okay, super. Does anyone else have any comments of things to add for these pages? And if not, I will roll right over into our last section, which is outbuildings. Okay. Do you have anything? No, okay. I read it. So that's the entire document. I think, yeah, there's a few takeaways. The main ones being just the layout of the images. And I think that it was clear to me that most people liked having them directly under the point that we're talking to, just for clarity's sake. So keeping that layout consistent through the whole document would be good. Also adding some clarification wording with or alongside some of these illustrations would be good. Does anyone else have any other big takeaways?
No, it doesn't sound like it. I think there were some excellent points brought up tonight. So thank you very much, Dora, for that.
All right. Okay. So thank you so much for your time. That was a big chunk of time to go through. Yeah, so I will get back to it. And then yeah, I guess the next piece of information following the design guidelines is that we'd like to have an open house on September the 19th. And the real purpose of this open house is to give homeowners and just community members the chance to actually get their hands on this document and look at real world examples of alterations, additions, new buildings, and see how maybe people unlike yourselves who have a bit of experience, so people who are just coming at it with no experience perhaps, and see how easy they find it to understand and go from there. Yeah, thanks, Philip.
Again, great job. Quick question, if you just wouldn't mind reiterating the place and the time that open house is on the 19th?
Yep.
Thank you.
So it'll be the 19th. It's going to be at the Lunenburg Library in room 103. And it's going to be from 1 to 4. We're going to do it drop-in open house style. So it won't be necessarily from 1 to 4. You can drop in anytime and just kind of go about the activity. And yeah, that's it. Oh.
So it's a chance to come in and chat individually rather than a discussion meeting.
Yeah, we can definitely chat individually. But yeah, it'll kind of be a time for people to familiarize themselves with the document and kind of use it as an exercise to see how easily they can navigate the document. So yeah, I think that's about all I have to say on the illustrations. Okay. With that, thank you very much for your patience. Yeah, I think that's it, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and your team for all that. It's I personally love visuals, so it definitely helps a lot. And yeah, great work. So we only have one other item on the agenda, 5.2, recognition of prominent Lunenburgers, nomination of Brigadier General Sheila Hellstrom. The draft motion is moved and seconded to recommend that council approve the nomination of Brigadier General Sheila Hellstrom as a prominent Lunenburger, with a ceremony to be held officially to mark the commemoration on a future date. Personally, for multiple reasons, I'm glad we're coming back into the prominent Lunenburgers. We kind of let this one lapse for a little bit, but I hope that this continues and only gains strength. And personally, I'm very glad that that she is being recognized for our first one coming back into it. For those who may not know, Ms. Hellstrom was born here in Lunenburg, grew up here. She worked her way up in the Canadian military and became the first female to achieve the rank of general. So a major milestone. Among many other things that she was involved in. I personally think that that these are the type of people that this prominent Lunenburgers list was made for. So I'm very glad personally to see that she's on here. With that, is there someone who is willing to move this motion? Moved by Fawn, seconded by Oliver. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion?
Really to be appreciative of the amount of material we were provided with, which is
Yes,
very
this
good.
this one came with a lot of excellent material to
The
tell her
family tree
story.
is rather fascinating to see when the name Cock became Cook.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Contrary minded, and the motion is carried. A reminder, Laura spoke it just a few minutes ago, but a reminder that there's an open house at the Academy on Thursday from 1 to 4 to further go over this. The next meeting will be announced as needed, and with no further business, I declare the meeting adjourned.